The bride. He lost in silence. A cowboy's dog found a woman buried in snow. The face he saw stopped his heart. Some vows never die. They only lie in wait for the day they awaken. Years ago, beneath the old oak tree, Colton Hayes slid a silver ring onto Abigail Turner's finger, swearing a lifetime together. But after a single winter, she vanished, leaving him to silence and grief. 2 decades passed, and Colton believed that love lay buried with the years. Until the night ranger barked into the blizzard, leading him to a body half frozen beneath the drifts. When Colton brushed away the snow, his heart seized in shock. Abigail. The story begins with that moment of fate, where the past, love, and secrets rise again, dragging them into a storm of justice and blood. Winter in the Montana mountains cut like a knife. The wind howled, tearing through pines glazed in ice. The land stretched endless and white. No trace of human step. Only the wolves' long cries echoing from distant valleys. Out of that wilderness came a lone rider, hunched in his saddle. Colton Hayes, cloak worn thin with years, gripped the reins tight. Beside him trotted a thick-furred shepherd, ranger, ears pricked, nose lifted to the wind, catching scents the man could not. Colton had grown used to winter's silence, but today Ranger broke it, barking sharp, urgent. The dog lunged ahead, claws tearing into a strange rise of snow. Colton swung down, heart hammering. He dropped to his knees, shoving aside the drifts with raw, calloused hands. A pale hand broke free of the ice, small, rigid, white as ivory. "Dear God," Colton rasped, digging faster. Snow scattered under his fingers until the shape of a woman emerged. Black hair spilled across the white, tangled and stiff. Her face was colorless, lips blue, breath barely there, so faint it seemed the next gust might carry it away. He lifted her head, brushed the hair from her face, and in that instant, the blood in his veins turned to stone. A face he'd carried in every dream for 20 years. Abigail Turner. The name struck him like a blade reopening an old wound. The girl he had once betrothed under the summer oak, the one who had worn his silver ring, who had promised to build a life on Montana soil, gone without a word. The valley had gossiped, but Colton had only known emptiness. "Abigail." His voice broke, torn by wind and memory. He pressed his ear to her chest. A heartbeat, faint, fragile but there. Ranger whined low, nudging her arm, urging him on. Colton cradled her against his chest, snow stinging his eyes. Above them the sky darkened, snow thickened. But Colton no longer cared. In his arms was not just a dying woman. She was his past, his promise, his unfinished vow, returned in the cruelest storm. "Don't leave me again, Abby," he whispered, eyes fierce with resolve. Through the blizzard, Colton staggered forward. Abigail clutched to him, Ranger forging the path. Each blast of wind cut like a whip, but he pressed on. At last, the shadow of his cabin rose out of the storm. He forced the door wide, carrying her inside, heat spilling from the hearth. He laid her on the bed, firelight brushing her frozen skin. Ranger crouched low at the foot, growling softly, guarding both his master and the stranger, who was no stranger at all. Colton tore off his scarf, wrapped her tighter. The fire threw his shadow tall on the timber wall, stirring memories buried too deep. A summer field, the oak tree, a silver ring slipped onto trembling fingers. Abigail's smile, bright as sun, and the foolish certainty that nothing could part them. Time had turned him into a lonely old man, but the past had never truly died. As he adjusted the blanket, his hand brushed her coat. Thin, fragile. How had she survived the storm at all? Then he felt it, a corner of paper. He pulled free a weathered envelope, edges torn, ink blurred by age. On its face, a shaky scrawl. To Colton Hayes. His throat closed. 2 decades he had lived with torment, Why had she gone? Why no word? And now, here lay the proof. She had tried to speak, but the letter never reached him. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, another storm rose in Colton's chest. A storm of love thought buried, of wounds unhealed, of questions sharp as knives. He gripped the letter tight, eyes fixed on the woman unconscious on his bed. Perhaps this faded envelope carried the truth that had slept beneath 20 years of snow. Morning light crept shyly through the frost-bitten window of the old cabin, its pale glow spilling across rough-hewn timbers. Outside, the wind still howled, slipping icy drafts through the cracks. Inside, only the crackle of firewood in the hearth broke the silence, mingling with the ragged breath of Abigail Turner, still lying motionless on the bed, her face gaunt, carved with the marks of years lost. Colton Hayes sat at the table, rough hands gripping a yellowed envelope he'd pulled from her coat. His eyes clung to the shaky handwriting on its face, as though blinking might make it vanish. At the foot of the bed, Ranger, the loyal shepherd, lay curled tight, ears flicking at every moan of wind. Now and then he gave a low growl, followed by a sharp bark, as if warning that something unseen pressed against the walls. Colton drew a breath and eased the letter open. The paper inside was brittle, edges frayed, ink blurred by time, yet the words still cut deep. And with the first lines, his grip tightened until the page nearly tore. Colton, if you're reading this, it may already be too late. My father uncovered something that was never meant to see the light. Proof of land corruption. They've bribed the judge, twisted the law, and threatened to kill us all if he speaks. Tonight, we must flee. I cannot say goodbye. I cannot take anything but the memory of you. Forgive me. The last line trembled, broken, as if written in terror. Colton sat frozen, eyes burning red. 20 years he had cursed her silence, wondered why she abandoned everything. Now the truth stood bare. She hadn't betrayed him. The Turner family had been forced to vanish to stay alive. Outside, the wind howled like fate's cruel laughter, drowning the Montana range in endless cold. Ranger suddenly sprang up, barking 3 sharp notes, hackles bristling, gaze locked on the door. Colton snatched the revolver from the table, heart thundering, only to hear nothing but the storm and snow striking the walls. He exhaled, stroked Ranger's head. Good boy. I know. This place ain't safe anymore. His eyes returned to Abigail. She stirred faintly, lips moving as if calling out to someone in her dreams. Colton clenched the letter tighter, the weight of the past pressing down on him. This was no mere homecoming. It was a warning. The ghosts of 20 years were tracking her, and now they'd found his door. By afternoon, the blizzard had eased, though wind still screamed through the pines. Firelight flickered on Colton's weathered face, each line etched deep with time. Abigail lay weak but breathing. Ranger stood guard at the door, ears sharp, every muscle taut. A sudden pounding shook the cabin, firm, insistent. Colton rose at once, hand to his gun. When he pulled the door wide, icy wind swept in along with a towering figure cloaked in frost. Sheriff Ethan Brooks. Colton. Ethan's voice rumbled low. His eyes swept the room, then fixed on the bed. They widened. God almighty. Is that Abigail Turner? Colton's grip tightened on the gun belt. It is. Found her under the snow. Thought she was gone. Ethan moved closer, lowered himself beside the bed. His gaze lingered long on her face, memory flickering in the depth of his eyes. 20 years ago, the Turners' disappearance was the first case I took as sheriff. No bodies, no trail. It haunted me ever since. Until now. The room held its breath. The flames danced low. Abigail moaned, lips cracked, whispering words that seemed to rise from a grave. They found me. Don't let them know about the papers. Colton's face blanched. He gripped her icy hand. Abby! What papers? But she slipped back into shadow, trembling, lost in nightmares. Ethan's gaze cut sharp. You heard her. Documents. If they exist, then that land scandal from 20 years ago never ended. Ranger growled low, body rigid, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the window. Colton shivered. His dog never bristled without reason. The wind slammed against the cabin walls. Shadows quivered in the firelight. Sheriff Ethan Brooks drew his Colt slow, his eyes hardening like steel. Colton, do you understand? If she holds those papers, she's the key to toppling an empire. And someone's coming to take them back, at any cost. Right then the sound came. Hoofbeats pounding through the storm, the clatter of metal on leather. Colton and Ethan locked eyes. No words needed. They both knew the riders had arrived. Ranger's snarl ripped the silence, teeth glinting in firelight. Abigail convulsed, whispering from her fever dream. The vault. Under the mine. Don't let them. Colton stiffened. Black Hollow Mine. The place that buried dozens of men in a so-called accident. The rumors had never died. Now the truth returned on the lips of a dying woman. From outside came a long, savage howl, the war cry of hired riders. Dozens of shadows closed in on the lonely cabin. Ethan cocked his Colt, voice low, deadly sure. Colton, hold Abigail. Me and Ranger will carve the path. Tonight, the ghosts of the past ain't just knocking. They've come to burn Montana to the ground. The fire cracked and spat in the old hearth, shadows stretching long against the cabin walls. Colton sat motionless at Abigail's bedside, eyes heavy from a sleepless night. Abigail Turner stirred, breath quick and shallow. Her lashes fluttered before her eyes parted, cloudy yet still burning faintly with life. Colton. Her voice broke, thin as a frayed thread. He leaned close, gripping her cold hand. I'm here, Abby. You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you again. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard, gaze clouded with fear. At last, her lips trembled with words buried for 20 long years. My father. He found what they tried to bury. He kept proof. A mining syndicate, money laundering, bribing judges. They'd kill a family whole just to keep it hidden. Colton froze, chest tightening. Her whisper sliced the silence like a knife. For years, whispers had floated through Montana of crooked land trades, of folks vanishing without a trace. He'd always brushed them aside as wind-blown rumors. Now he knew it was real, and the Turners had been dragged into the heart of it. Abigail's eyes closed, tears slipping down her pale cheek. We fled that night. My father, he hid the papers someplace no one would ever think to look. Said one day, truth would find its way back. Colton clasped her hand tighter, heart pounding. The fire popped loud, as though marking the weight of her confession. Then Ranger stiffened, ears pricked high. A growl rolled from deep in his chest. He stalked to the window, body taut, staring out into the storm. A crack sounded in the woods, branch or boot, Colton couldn't tell. His hand slid to the revolver on the table. Someone's out there, he whispered. Ranger barked, sharp and violent, shaking the walls. Colton parted the curtain just enough to peer outside. Nothing but white snow and dark timber. Yet every instinct screamed. The same men who once tried to erase the Turners had caught Abigail's scent. He returned to her side, eyes flaring with resolve. Don't you worry, Abby. Whoever they are, I won't let them lay a hand on you again. The wind rose in a wailing chorus, carrying a long, hollow cry across the mountains. In that cabin, the truth unveiled, itself like a spark, and with it came the promise of a coming war. The silence after her words pressed heavy. Only the pop of burning wood and the moan of the gale filled the room. Colton's gaze locked on the fire, as if the flames could answer the storm in his mind. A memory stirred, so sharp it made him shiver. Back when he was a boy helping his father with cattle, Colton remembered Old Man Hayes sitting for hours over the ranch ledgers. Among tallies of calves and sale dates were odd little marks, small circles, stray slashes that never fit. Colton had asked once, but his father only smiled faint. Some things a son doesn't need to know yet. When the time comes, you will now. Abigail's words lit the truth. His father and Thomas Turner hadn't just been neighbors. They were allies. Knowing testimony alone would never hold weight, they had hidden the proof in plain sight. Coded into livestock records no lawman would ever question. Colton rose, pulled down an old trunk from the loft. Dust puffed as he dragged out ledgers thick with age. Ranger sniffed around, tail twitching, as if he too felt the gravity of what lay inside. Turning page after page, Colton saw them again. The strange X's, the numbers that never matched the herd. Not mistakes, not carelessness. Codes, secrets. A cipher written in ink disguised as ranching math. "Abby," Colton said low, voice rough with awe. "Your pa and mine, they work together. These marks, they're no accident. They hid the truth in here, waiting for someone to see it." Her tired eyes opened, faint light of hope breaking through. "Then it still lives." "Justice isn't dead, Colton. It's only waiting to be set free." Colton clutched the ledger, pulse pounding. 2 decades he had lived with grief, with no answers for why she vanished, why the Turners were lost. But now the pieces clicked into place. His father had not just been a victim of fate, but a man who gambled his life to keep the truth alive. Outside, the wind roared, rattling the pines. Colton knew this much. The men who once tried to silence that truth were not gone. And now that Abigail had returned, they would come again. But this time, he swore, the truth would not die in the dark. Night fell on Montana like a heavy black shroud, and with it came the storm. Snow hammered the mountainside, wind shrieking through the pines, shards of ice slamming against the cabin's old wooden walls. Inside, Colton Hayes fed the fire, sweat glistening on his brow, though the cold outside could flay a man raw. His eyes cut often to the narrow window, nerves strung taut. Then, through the blur of snow, came a flicker of yellow. Lantern light, swaying, inching closer like the blink of the devil's eye. Colton pulled the curtain aside, breath catching. A wagon creaked across the frozen earth, wheels groaning. Not the mark of any neighbor, nor a lost traveler braving the night. Ranger knew it first. The shepherd hurled himself before the door, hackles bristling, teeth bared. His bark split the storm, raw and urgent. On the bed, Abigail stirred, breath ragged, as if her very bones sensed the danger drawing near. Colton snuffed the lamps, leaving only the ember glow of the hearth. He took down the rifle from its peg, the smell of oil and steel thick in his lungs. Through the frost-streaked glass he saw them now, figures, more than one, shadows carrying rifles across their shoulders, moving slow and sure like wolves circling prey. "They've come, Abby," he muttered, voice low as a prayer. His eyes lingered on her hollowed face, remembering the night she vanished, 20 years gone. That same night had birthed this storm now pressing at his door. Wheels crunched closer. Ranger snarled, ready to rip through the wood itself. Colton steadied him with a hand. "Easy, boy." Not yet. The cabin lay in darkness, fire snapping low like the heartbeat of a cornered beast. Colton pressed against the wall, rifle tight to his chest, breath measured. He knew, within heartbeats, the storm would break through. Outside, the wagon lamp smeared the snow in streaks of gold, like blood spilled across ice. Colton understood. Tonight, The blizzard was not the danger. The true storm wore faces and carried guns. Hoofbeats thundered suddenly, drowning the wind. The shadowed figures halted when new light blazed across the road. A voice rang through the storm, hard as iron. "Hold it right there! This is Sheriff Ethan Brooks." Colton peered through the crack. Sheriff Brooks rode forward, 3 deputies at his back, rifles gleaming under torchlight. Their faces, stern and resolute, burned against the whiteout like guardians at the gate. The armed men faltered, eyes darting. Then another shape stepped from behind them, a towering figure draped in black. His cloak snapped in the gale, his face carved in stone, eyes dark as the abyss. When the torch caught him full, Colton's blood froze. "No," he whispered. Sheriff Brooks' jaw set, voice a growl. "Silas Kane." The name struck like a hammer. All knew it. Silas Kane, the Shadow Lord of Montana, blamed for killings, theft, and land wars that scarred the frontier. Folks swore he'd died 20 years past, bones rotting under rock. Yet here he stood, flesh and blood, storm at his back. Colton's chest knotted. Memory surged. His father, William Hayes, buried in the Black Hollow mine. Accident. Thomas Turner, Abigail's father, vanishing after defying the council's land grab. Now the pieces slid together under Silas's voice, deep and venomous. "I thought you wiser," he said, words cutting through the wind. "None dared stir that past. 20 years ago I paid the price to end the lines of Hayes and Turner. But it seems a few seeds survived. And now they dare stand before me," Abigail moaned, twisting on the bed, her breath quickened by nightmares too real. Colton's grip on the rifle tightened, eyes blazing. "You murdered my father. You buried hers. You built your empire on innocent blood. But tonight, Silas, you'll find no grave deep enough to hide." Sheriff Brooks raised his rifle, voice thunderous. "Enough, Kane! The law rides in Montana again. You'll answer for every soul you've taken." Silas laughed, low, rotten, like timber splitting in rot. "The law? Brooks, you fool. The law of this town has been in my pocket for 20 years. And tonight will be no different then." A whistle cut the gale. A signal. From the storm burst riders by the dozen, torches blazing, turning the snowfield into a hell of fire and shadow. Ranger roared, leaping to the door, teeth flashing. Brooks cocked his rifle, but Colton's hand shot out, eyes locked on Kane. "No, not yet. Let him live long enough to confess. Let all Montana hear his sins." The door shuddered, then blew open with a blast. Wind and gunpowder smoke ripped inside, cloaks of black spilling through. Silas's killers, bred in shadow, had come to finish what was buried 20 years ago. On the bed, Abigail fought to lift her head. Her whisper sliced through the chaos. "Colton, the vault, under the mine, the proof." Colton staggered, mind reeling. Black Hollow, the grave of his father, the town's shame, was more than ruin. It held the very evidence to damn Silas Kane. Only by dragging it into daylight could the ghosts be laid to rest. Sheriff Brooks shouted over storm and gunfire. "Protect the woman! Colton, get the proof. Tonight we either write justice anew or vanish beneath this snow." Colton clenched his rifle, heart pounding like war drums. Outside, torches blazed like demon eyes in the storm. He knew this was no longer his fight alone. Tonight would decide the fate of Montana itself. That night, as the blizzard finally began to ease, Colton Hayes lit a single oil lamp and guided Abigail down the creaking wooden steps into the old wine cellar. Each footfall echoed against damp stone, carrying the smell of rot and mildew. Ranger padded ahead, nose low to the ground, snuffling, pausing, then glancing back as if urging them on. The cellar had once held barrels and bottles, his father's pride. Now dust blanketed the shelves, cobwebs draped like silver veils. But Colton wasn't searching for wine. He was searching for something far older, a treasure his father and Thomas Turner had hidden away. He stopped before the back wall of stone. Under the lantern's flicker, the rough blocks glimmered cold and gray. Colton ran his hand across the cracks, memory pulling at him. At 16, he had watched his father disappear into this cellar for hours, returning with an expression carved deep in thought. Now Colton understood. Those hours had been spent guarding a secret. "Here," Colton muttered, voice rough. He pressed hard against one stone at the corner. A soft click rang out. Abigail gasped as part of the wall shifted, sliding back to reveal a hidden hollow. From it, Colton dragged a heavy wooden chest. Dust swirled as he pulled the lid open. The air thickened, grave-like. Inside lay stacks of ledgers, receipts, deeds, and maps scrawled with strange symbols. Abigail's hands trembled as she lifted a bundle of pages. "This is it!" Her voice broke, tears in her eyes. "Everything Father told me. It's all true." Colton bent close. The strange marks he'd once ignored in cattle ledgers were here in abundance. Circles, X's, scattered numbers, all codes, not scribbles. Every mark pointed to crooked deals, laundered money, stolen land. "Lord Almighty," Colton whispered. "Your father risked everything to preserve this." Abigail clutched the papers to her chest, frail hands quivering. "They killed him for this." "Killed my mother. But they failed, Colton. We can prove the truth now." Their eyes met in the lamplight, filled with a steel that had been missing for 20 years. Ranger barked once, sharp and echoing, as if to seal the vow. The moment of reckoning had come. The cellar, once a sanctuary of wine, now stood as a crypt of promises. Justice, buried in shadows, had been unearthed. As they leafed through the fragile pages, Ranger growled low, circling. His claws scratched at the floorboards, scraping hard enough to jolt them both. "What is it, boy?" Colton frowned, rushing over. The shepherd barked deep, pawing furiously at one dark patch of wood. Abigail lowered the lantern. In the wavering glow, a narrow seam appeared, almost invisible. Colton's heart thudded. He knelt, drove his knife under the board, prying. With a crack, the plank lifted, dust spilling. Beneath, a rusted iron hatch revealed itself, locked tight. Abigail's eyes widened, fear and hope twined together. Colton gripped the latch, yanked until the lock gave way. Below lay a hidden cavity. From its shadows he hauled a battered iron safe, edges chipped but sturdy still. He dragged it open. Inside, not gold, not jewels, just a single leather-bound journal, corners worn smooth. Etched on the cover, still legible despite time. William Hayes. Colton's hands shook. He had never known his father left such a thing. Abigail touched his shoulder, voice hushed. "This is what he wanted you to find." Colton opened it. At first, the script spoke of daily ranch work, cattle sold, storms weathered. But as the pages turned, the writing grew hurried, tense. Each line recorded threats, meetings with men who wanted his land. Then, halfway through, bold words seared across the page like a brand. "My death will not be natural. If you find this, carry the truth forward. Do not let the lands of McKinnon and Turner fall into their hands." Colton's breath caught. His chest heaved, every vein in his neck taut. His eyes burned red as though fire had risen straight from his father's grave. Abigail's tears spilled as she read the words aloud, her voice breaking, shivering like glass. Outside, the wind howled through the shutters, shrill and mournful, like the cries of restless spirits. But in that cellar, the dead spoke clear, their voices scrawled in ink and bound by blood. Ranger sat beside them, ears sharp, muscles taut, eyes glowing amber in the lantern light, as if he too knew the weight of this moment. The dog growled low, not at shadows, but at the truth itself. Colton closed the journal against his chest, clutching it as though it were his father's very heart, still beating, still demanding justice. A fire lit within him, not only to protect Abigail, not only to reclaim 2 decades of love lost, but to finish what his father had begun. He rose to his feet, trembling not with fear, but with fury. "They didn't just kill him," Colton muttered, voice ragged. "They carved this land from his bones." Abigail grasped his hand, her voice trembling yet fierce. "Then we carve it back, with truth. With law, with blood, if we must." Before he could answer, Ranger snapped to the door, ears back, growl echoing in the cellar's stone walls. Boots crunched in the snow outside. The hinges groaned. The journal had not been hidden by chance. Someone else had known it lay here. Someone had led them to it. The door burst open, lamplight slicing through the cellar, and standing in its glow was not a hired gun nor a faceless outlaw. It was Sheriff Hobb himself, the lawman who had sworn to protect Miller's Creek. His badge gleamed in the lantern light, but his eyes were black hollows of greed. "Well," Hobb drawled, cocking his rifle with ease, "the dead sure do have a way of talking, don't they?" Abigail gasped, clutching the journal. Colton's hand tightened on his revolver, but he knew the truth in a flash. The sheriff wasn't here to arrest him. He was here to bury the truth once and for all. The cellar thickened with silence. Outside, the wind wailed like a funeral hymn. Inside, 3 hearts and 1 hound stood at the edge of destiny. And Colton Hayes understood. This fight was no longer about a vow beneath an oak or a ring returned after 20 years. It was about a reckoning that would rip Miller's Creek in 2, between those who buried the truth and those who would bleed to drag it into the light. The blizzard roared, every gust slamming against the ranch walls until the timbers shuddered. Through the white haze, dark shapes crept closer, shadows shifting in the storm. Ranger's ears shot up, a growl rolling deep in his chest. Colton gripped his old Winchester tight, eyes cold and fixed on the window. At his side, Sheriff Brooks had drawn steel, seasoned gaze sharp with caution. Abigail, frail but fierce, clutched the letter and the leather-bound journal, the proof they'd unearthed in the cellar. The first gunshot cracked through the gale. A bullet splintered the beam inches above Abigail's head. Colton yanked her to the wall. "Down!" he barked. Ranger thundered to the door, barking like rolling thunder, his fury drowning the storm itself. Outside, the armed men emerged clearer, Silas Kane at their head, black cloak whipping in the snow, his hollow face lit with a predator's fire. "Hand over the papers, Hayes," his voice boomed. "Don't waste blood for nothing." Colton answered with lead, his shots striking the snow at their feet. Brooks fired clean, driving back those reckless enough to breach the fence line. Inside, Abigail trembled, but her fear hardened into steel. They could not run. They could not let their father's sacrifice rot in the hands of murderers. Ranger burst through the crack of the door, clamping down on one raider's arm, dragging him screaming into the snow. Colton seized the moment, firing with precision. Each shot a vow carried on the names of Hayes and Turner. The firefight raged like it would never end. Gunfire split the night, echoing over the plains. Abigail fed cartridges into Colton's hands, clutching the oilcloth-wrapped files against her chest. "Colton, we have to send this now," she cried. Brooks nodded, voice iron. "The federal post is just miles away. My men are near. Hold the line a little longer." Outside, Silas Kane raged as his men fell. He surged forward, revolver in hand, sight fixed on Abigail. In that heartbeat of death, Ranger hurled himself into the path, knocking the pistol wide. The shot rang astray. Colton swung his Winchester and fired. The bullet slammed into Silas's shoulder, dropping him to the snow in a spray of crimson. A whistle pierced the storm, the call of reinforcements. Federal riders stormed in, torches and rifles blazing, lanterns burning like stars through the blizzard. Silas's men broke, scattering into the dark, leaving their master bleeding in the drift. Sheriff Brooks charged out, waving the feds forward. Abigail clung to Colton's hand, tears steaming in the frozen air. "We kept it safe." Colton met her eyes, voice low with reverence. "My father. Yours. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain." Outside, the last of Silas's gang were shackled, dragged toward the wagons. Sheriff Brooks stood silent, eyes worn yet alight with relief. Justice, after 20 years, had come back to Montana. Colton, coat spattered with powder and blood, watched as Silas Kane was hauled away. The outlaw's head hung low, his glare burning with fury and defeat. For Colton, it wasn't just victory. It was the end of 2 decades haunted by silence, by questions without answers. He drew a breath of icy air, and for the first time, it filled him with peace. Abigail stepped from the cabin, cloak wrapped tight, hair tangled but eyes bright with resolve. She looked out at the dawn breaking through storm clouds, burning gold over Hayes Ranch. Ranger walked at her side, fur thick with snow, eyes glowing like a guardian who had stood the gates of hell and held fast. "Abby," Colton called softly. His voice cracked like an old rifle but carried the weight of steel. He took her hand, leading her down the snowy trail to the edge of the farm. There stood the old oak tree, scarred, gnarled, its bark charred from past lightning, yet unbroken, a sentinel that had seen lifetimes of grief and grace. Beneath those branches they had once sworn forever. Colton stopped, his breath shivering in the cold air, and drew a silver ring from his coat. It gleamed in the new sun like memory itself, tarnished yet enduring. "Back then I failed to keep my promise," he said, voice rough as gravel. "But today, under this tree, in this new dawn, Abby, will you take my vow again?" Abigail froze, her tears falling hot against the snow. Her smile burned brighter than the sunrise. She held out her trembling hand. Colton slid the silver ring onto her finger, sealing 2 lost decades in one breathless moment. Ranger sat beside them, ears pricked, the loyal witness of a vow reborn. But before silence could settle, a gunshot shattered the air. Bark splintered from the oak. From the ridge, shadows moved, figures cloaked in black dusters, rifles raised. Hobbs' men, the last remnants of the corruption they thought buried. Colton spun, pulling Abby close. "They won't let us walk into tomorrow without a fight." Ranger growled, hackles bristling, the sound low and thunderous. The dog darted forward, teeth bared, as a second shot rang out. One of the men fell, his rifle clattering on ice. Abigail's hand clutched the silver ring, knuckles white. "Colton," she whispered, voice trembling yet fierce. "This isn't just our vow. It's justice. For my father. For all they buried in silence." The sun spread across the snow, but now it gleamed red where blood stained the drifts. Colton raised his rifle, shoulders squared, and met Abby's eyes. "Then today, under this tree, we fight as one." The oak loomed above, its branches groaning in the wind. Once a witness to love, now it would stand as a gallows for the guilty, or a shrine to promises fulfilled. And as the wind carried the cry of Ranger's defiance, it bore the whisper of vows renewed, sealed not only by love, but by fire, blood, and law. As the first light stretched over the plains, Colton, Abigail, and the faithful ranger closed their story, not with tears, but with a vow fulfilled after 20 long years. Out here in the Wild West, where storms swallow men whole, love and justice can still burn brighter than the dark. Many of you watching may feel it, because we all have promises once broken, memories thought lost to time. But sometimes, like Colton and Abigail, it takes years for love and loyalty to prove themselves unshakable. If this tale stirred a memory in your own heart, share it with us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and spread this story so the warmth of the West rides on to reach more hearts yet.